Okay, you're on.
We are back with another special guest here on the Limitless Leadership Lounge, a tri-generational conversation for emerging leaders. I'm John Gehring, joined as always by Dr. Numa Kareem and Coach Jim Johnson. And Dr. Kareem, you've brought along another doctor as well today, so we're excited to dive in and get some leadership strategies from Dr. Craig Nathanson. So, Dr. Kareem, go ahead and introduce our guest.
Hi, John. Hi, everybody. It's an honor to have Dr. Craig Nathanson among us today. Few years back, Coach and I were working on a book on emerging leadership, and we started to explore leaders who are sustaining their leadership skills across era and culture. And that is when I found out that there is a humanistic model, and Dr. Craig Nathanson actually started this built this humanistic leadership model in 2015. And Dr. Craig Nathanson is an educator, author, a speaker, and a leadership coach. And he was the creator of both the humanistic leadership model in 2015 and also the joyful work model. He also teaches both graduate and undergraduate programs in North America, China, Europe, Vietnam, all across the world, and has been working with various senior management and fortune management from different organizations and also Fortune 500 companies over 20 years on the intersection of work and midlife. So thank you so much for being with us, Dr. Craig Nathanson, and it's an honor. And we will be picking your brain on this new model. So one of my first question to you, why and what made you interested in the humanistic leadership model when there are so many leadership model all across the world?
Well, first of all, thank you, Ray Numa and John and Jim for having me on your show. I think this is an inspiration, and I'm so happy that you're doing the work that you do. Back in I would say 2015, I was, a college professor, which I still am today, and I started to be concerned about, for there's been maybe 100 years of research in the areas of, management leadership. And a lot of people, I thought to myself, are confused about the difference between management and leadership. And furthermore, there was little mention of coaching. So I decided to create a model for myself to get some clarity on this and so that I could teach it even better to my students. But more importantly, I not for the first time, but back in 2015, and this is before the pandemic, I started to become very concerned about our world. And I said, the ways in which we lead people today are declining in our quest and thirst for profit. And I thought to myself intellectually that if we don't change the way we, perhaps, parent and lead our sports teams and lead our organizations and lead our countries, that we are not going to be sustainable. And of course, I wasn't the only one who said this. So I started to become really concerned about that, and I decided that I had and have today a sense of urgency in my life about two areas. One of which is learning how to lead ourselves and others in ways that collectively are going to make for a better world. And then, of course, my other body of work for many, many years is joyful work. I really believe that the world would be a better place if we just calmed down and did what we love. So I created, both of these models back in 2015. And, back then, if you typed into Google humanistic leadership, you got my work, you didn't get anybody else's work, and that was about it. Nobody paid much attention. And then after the pandemic, all of a sudden, Gen Z, especially younger generation, started to resonate with this idea of meaning and sustainability and so on. If there was anything that came out of the pandemic that was positive, it was that for at least for a while, organizations started to pay more attention to the humane aspects of their staff. Today, here in 2024, I'm happy to say that if you type in humanistic leadership, you'll get lots of bodies of work around the world. There's an organization called the International Humanistic Management Association, and there's a lot of momentum now. So I'm happy to see that. So that's, that was the birth of the work. And today, again, I have a sense of urgency in my life about this, like I've never had before.
Yeah. And Simon Sinek also in one of his podcasts was mentioning humanistic leadership
Hmm.
and how his idea of creating that safe environment where everybody feels loved and taken care of. That is so important. And he mentioned that humanistic leadership is the approach. So I was like, yeah, that's what Dr. Craig Nathanson
Wow,
was
I look
talking
forward to
about.
his testimonial. That's great.
Coach.
So, Dr. Craig, let's delve a little bit deeper into, because so for many years in leadership, even when I started, back in the dark ages, command and control was kind of the leadership model. And it's still out there. But certainly we are starting to see a trend in a change of leadership, humanistic ways. So let's delve a little deeper. Tell us, what are the changes that you see more effective leaders are doing today as opposed to even 10 years ago?
Well, I think I think people today are starting to become a little bit more self-aware, Jim. People, we have more tools and ideas than ever before in how we can live, more purposeful lives. And I think those people that are in a position of leadership are probably more self-aware than maybe leaders of 15 or 20 years ago. And so I think that is helping. I also think there's pressure from the younger generation, quite frankly. A third of our workforce, 70 million plus young adults between 18 and 25 they really want to, they don't say it this way, but they want to find meaning in their work. Their parents, Gen Z, Gen X, grew up in the kind of the reward and punishment model, survival of the fittest, and in some ways that has rubbed off on Gen Z in terms of just wanting to promotion and money and so on. But the thing that hasn't that didn't pass down, fortunately, is younger generations. They want to find something in life that gives them some sense of meaning. It's very normal for a young person in an interview today to say, by the way, how will this company help me reach my goals? How will this company help me find meaning? So I think a combination of people just these days, especially post-pandemic, are more sensitive to themselves and the humane aspect. And then I think the younger generation is really pushing change.
Yeah, and it definitely is part of that younger generation. I can attest to that. That's one of those areas where, like Coach said, that command and control, the difference now being more empathetic leadership. Can you talk about like humanistic versus empathetic leadership, and what the quality of empathy and how that applies to your model of leadership?
The humanistic leadership model starts with the idea of, being self-aware at the top, and all the things that, all of you have talked about on your shows. If you're self-aware, you're able to go to the next level, which, I call systems thinking, the idea to holistically step back and see how, your actions affect others. And then you get to the third tier, which is humanistic, which is addresses your question, John. On one hand, it seems common sense to treat people how you want to be treated, to be humane, to have respect, to show empathy, to have compassion. But sometimes we have to remind people. So I would take the idea of empathy, and well, it's already embedded in this tier of being humanistic.
Mm, good.
Yeah, and we are often talking about one of your podcasts. That was so interesting that you were talking about we are mid. It should be joy in your joyful work, midlife crisis, not midlife crisis, but midlife crusade. So that is such an important point. Like we hear about the midlife crisis. So in my 40s, suddenly everybody's talking about midlife crisis, but I see it as midlife awakening.
Mhm.
And it matched with your thought, like the crusade. And sadly, we have seen that most of a majority of our of the friends and people we have around, they are always like looking forward to Saturday or Sunday, the weekend, so not so much into Monday. They are not joyful with their work. So what are some of your advice based on your finding that we can do and as leaders can do to create that environment where people are interested to come on Monday? Like, yeah, Monday, I'm here to work. So what can they do? Because this is so important, because happy people can create and contribute more than sad people. So, what are the things that now the leaders should be paying attention to create that environment?
But by the way, before I answer that, Renuma, I want to say that one way to to know whether you are having joyful work is, you get to Friday and that's fun. Friday night you get to relax. Saturday you run errands and you enjoy yourself with the family and so on. And Sunday morning is fine. You sleep in. But if you don't enjoy your work about 2 o'clock on Sunday, no matter what you're doing, you start to think about Monday.
Yeah.
When you have joyful work, you can't wait to go to sleep on Sunday night. You toss and turn and you say, "Is it time to get up yet?" And finally, you just get up because you can't wait. And every email, every phone call, every interaction you have is joyful. So that's
Mm.
kind of how you know.
Mm.
To answer your question, I think people in leadership positions, it's not that complicated. I suggest, by the way, I think the most important indicator in business you should measure, with all due respect, is the amount of joy people have. When joy goes up in my research, all the other business indicators go up. And so I think leaders have to ask people, Renuma, do you enjoy your work? Why or why not? And then be prepared to support, either one of those answers. And then the second question is, you know, what motivates you and why, and be prepared to support you with those answers. We have to stop using motivation as a verb. If we teach people how to motivate themselves, it'll last a lifetime, and we're doing a big service to them. So I think, just quite frankly, asking people, do you enjoy your work, and seeing what they say.
Right.
What motivates you? If there's trust built, people will answer those questions, and if not, that's where the coaching aspect comes in. Jim, I'm sure could attest to that.
Mhm.
Well, we just brought up a word, Craig, and actually, I was going to ask another question. I may come back to it, but it really jumped out at me because I'm always talking to leaders about that big T word, trust. And when I do a leadership presentation, I'll ask how important is trust in building a great team culture, and it's always 100%. People agree, but my curiosity is, what are you helping leaders? How can they be more effective in building trust with their team?
But they have to be real. They have to be both vulnerable and humble. When I was leading teams back in my corporate days, I would take a new team in the room and I would write all my values on the wall and say, "Let me," and here's how I know if I'm following them, and here's how I know if I'm not, and let me know if I'm not. And then, do you want to share your values? And sometimes people would, sometimes they wouldn't. But then I would make sure that I just, met with people every 2 weeks on a regular basis, and we worked collaboratively. And it's like you're raising a child, it just takes time. It takes time. It takes time. But I think all of those things take time. But if you invest the time in people, the trust will be built. Trust. You have to make an investment in trust. You can't pay for trust.
Mm.
Now, tell
And
us a little
that's
bit about what you do to Dr. Nathanson, who you educate, and what you've written and what you typically speak on. What can someone expect if they're going to be working with you?
Mhm. Well, my focus in my work these days is humanistic leadership and joyful work. I'm a college professor at many colleges all over the world. I call myself an entrepreneur teacher, and I've been independent in that way for about 20 years. And so I teach, a variety of things, but my core work, for example, the workshops I do for companies and so on, really focus around joyful work for people in transition, college graduates looking to figure out, now that I'm in college, what do I do for the rest of my life? People in military transition, people in transition, um, who really want to create a roadmap for their work and life. That's I was doing in Vietnam last month, helping young people figure that out. And then my other branch of work, of course, is humanistic leadership. I was in China last month, working with many leaders there who are interested in, Western models of leadership, and specifically the humanistic leadership, which kind of aligns with Confucius principles. And so you can't really argue with some of my ideas, which is nice. And so if you're going to work with me, I think you're going to 90% of what you're going to hear from me. It's like if you go for, Chinese food, you're going to get a fortune cookie, right? At least in America. In China, there's no fortune cookies, by the way. But with me, you're going to hear one of those two topics, I think, about 90% of the time, because for the rest of my life, this is my focus. I try to post 6, 7 times a week on LinkedIn. I have newsletters. I'm writing books. I'm also writing a new book on humanistic leadership for a new world, because it's my dent in the earth, as Steve Jobs used to say with Apple. I don't know what else to do. I can get angry and frustrated about what I see going on in the world, or I could just try to do something every day. And if I can make a difference in one person, that's good enough.
Yeah, and we can see there's such a big crisis in leadership in so many areas, not just corporate, politicals, everywhere.
Mhm.
And even parents need to have that humanistic approach towards raising kids. That is so important. While we're talking about your travels, I'm so much curious, like because you've been to China, Vietnam, and we know that there is this model, Hofstede cultural dimension model, where they talked about power distance.
Mhm.
Then what is the cultural communication method? In our part of the world, often that leadership is the title, so you don't question them, just listen to them. And the leaders, they themselves know that we are in that position and we can impose things. So people are working hours and hours. They don't leave office until the leader is leaving the room. So if he's leaving the office at 10 o'clock, then all the employees, even if they don't have any work, they have to sit around because it's the power dimension. So how would you suggest, like, what would motivate those leaders to just shift a little bit and move towards the humanistic approach? And if you could just again reiterate some of the major trait that you have found the humanistic leaders possess.
So when I teach in Asia, in Asian culture, it's a collective society.
Mhm.
And on the other hand, it's a society where people want to make sure they save face, they're not humiliated, and they're used to autocratic, leaders. And that's just how it's been culturally for, thousands of years.
Mhm.
So as I teach and train autocratic leaders in, for example, China, Vietnam, and other Asian countries, I tell them, the importance of giving to build trust. You have to allow people a chance to participate. And it's a little scary to let go of that control. For example, when I teach in the US, students, raise their hand. They're very eager to ask questions. In Asia, I put students in groups and I let them work on their own, and then they report back their findings and we discuss. And that's how I
Mhm.
build trust there. So I think so people are people all around the world. We all have the same DNA. But when you go to different cultures, you have to adjust your teaching. You have to adjust the way you deploy your information. So the message is the same, but I think the approach is a little bit different. For example, when I'm teaching in Asia
Mhm.
versus the US. Let's see, your second question. I think you asked about
The
humanistic.
traits, like some of the
Yeah.
traits of humanistic leaders that you have seen.
So I talked earlier about the model a little bit. The model starts with self-awareness, systems thinking, humanistic, and then we could touch on this later. In my mind,
Mhm.
there's three skills of humanistic leadership. There's leading, managing, and coaching. Leading is selling tickets for the journey. This is how I like to discuss it. It's getting people excited. It's the vision. The opposite of leadership is management. A good manager is driving the bus, making sure that people know where they're going, goals are in place, and so on. And coaching, is the structure, is the support system, making sure that people are happy and they get to where they need to go on time. That's the coaching aspect. But the point is, it all has to come from the same person. And as we get better at humanistic leadership, we figure out without thinking, which one should I do now? So that's the next tier. And then the last couple tiers of the model to get to your question. One is leadership styles, and those are behaviors. And we all have different behaviors from democratic to collaborative to structural to authoritative. I've identified eight leadership styles. And the bottom line is you have to lead in ways that are comfortable to you, but also get good positive results in people. I found that
Mhm.
the democratic and collaborative styles in combination seem to work the best. And lastly is personality traits or leadership traits, which is your question. Under leadership traits, there are many identified, over 15. I think the top three leadership traits, two of them relate to our personalities, the Big Five personality matrix. I think number one is conscientiousness. A good leader, humanistic leader, has to be high in conscientiousness. We have to be a systems thinker. We have to think about what are the unintended consequences of what might happen if I, make this decision or say this. We have to be organized. We have to be disciplined. So I think being high in conscientiousness is important. Two, I think we have to be high in what's called emotional stability. We have to be calm during crisis. We have to be calm. We have to be the same, we have to have the same emotional stability in the morning as we do in the evening. And by the way, if your personality doesn't align to that, that's okay. Studies have shown we can't change our personality very much, but we can modify our behavior.
Right.
So I think that's number two. And I think three is sociability. Even if we're introverts, we have to learn to be sociable. Our followers expect us to to be sociable. And so I think those are the three that stand out to me if I was going to start with three leadership traits.
Right. Right.
Let's delve into more about your joyful work.
Mhm.
So, can you define, from your perspective, what is joyful work? And then, if you were working with a young person getting out and you would give them advice on how they could find joyful work, what would you share with them?
So joyful work is when you can't tell the difference between Monday and Friday, vacation and vocation, work and play. It's all the same. Like if you ask me now, am I working or playing? I don't know. I would have to say it's like asking me, am I breathing? I don't know. Let me check. Yes. Joyful work is when, so my definition of work, Jim, is doing what you love for most of the day for most of your life. So doing what you love for most of the day for most of your life. Notice I didn't say anything about money because I've found in my research that when you figure out what it is that you really enjoy, there's no reason to ever stop. My first book was called Don't Just Retire and Die. It didn't go over very well, so I changed the title. But joyful work is when, everything is blissful. You feel congruent. You feel that what you're doing makes sense. You could do it forever. Your in-laws all of a sudden look nicer to you. You're just a happier, calmer person. So I get this question a lot, Professor Nathanson, cut to the chase. How could I find my passion? How could I find my joyful work? And here's the shortcut, because I know people like shortcuts. You take a piece of paper, and on the left, you write down all of your abilities. What are the things that you're good at? Not that people say that you're good at, but what are you really good at? And you're motivated to do, right? You don't want to write down all the things that you're good at, but you no longer want to do. Like you can't see, but in my office here, I have, and it hasn't gone off yet. I have a smoke alarm that beep, beep, beep. I have to change the battery, but I'm lazy. I have the skill to change the battery. I have to get a ladder and climb up, but I'm lazy, so I'll probably hire somebody. So I could change the battery. I have the ability, but I'm no longer interested. Therefore, the battery is not working. So you make a list of all the things that you're good at and you're motivated to do. And then on the other side of the piece of paper, you make a list of your deep interest. Like if I took all of you to a physical bookstore, I don't know if they exist anymore, for 2 hours, I call this the bookstore test. Think about what part of the bookstore would you go to? That tells me where your deepest interests are. So you make a list of your deepest interests, and then you circle the matches between abilities and deep interests. So you circle the matches. It's the intersection of abilities and interests where joyful work can be found. The last thing I'll say on that is that it's better to be interested and have no idea how to do it because you'll be motivated to learn than to be good at something but no longer care. So to me, I think that's the shortest answer I can give of my life's work. It's the intersection of abilities and deep interest.
Right.
Okay. And what would you recommend too for a young leader, maybe just coming out of college or maybe just getting their first promotion in their young career? Uh, what would you recommend they do resource wise to find leadership tips and tactics? Because so many of us are, solid performers in our roles, but then we get to that leadership position and we're like, shoot, this isn't really my role. This is something different. Being a leader is actually a practice that I have to do. What are some of the ways that those new leaders could find some good resources?
Well, first, John, I would start with leading yourself because I've observed that when people know themselves deeply, and a lot of us are so busy these days scrolling, we don't take the time. Young people today spend an average of, not criticizing, but an average of 4 to 5 hours a day on social media. And if you turn half of that time into productive time on yourself, you get yourself an extra day a week, by the way.
Mm.
I think a young person I would advise to really sit down and understand. You all have talked about this on your show. What are your values? What's important to you? But then how do you know if you're following your values, and how do you know if you're not? I call those your sort of operating rules. And so get really clear about, and you've talked about this before, your purpose in your life, where you want to make a contribution in the world, how that aligns to your values, and how those values align to your daily behaviors. And then match those up to your goals in your life. I think so. That's kind of a short answer to, first put a roadmap together for your own life. First, come up with a short list of who you think you are as a person. Examine your belief systems. Answer the question, I am a person who. Okay, so number one, I think work on yourself. If you're able to have confidence in yourself, then I think you're 50% towards being a great leader. That's my personal belief. All the other things can be learned, John. Like you said, I mean, there's thousands of resources out there. I suggest to learn anything, it's a 30-day process. So say I want to learn about leadership. For the next 30 days, I surround myself every day with podcasts and physical books, which are important to read. And my own research and Netflix shows and everything I can on the subject of leadership. And I make mind maps. Mind maps are very important. It captures the right side of your brain. It helps you learn. And so you kind of embark on a study of personal leadership. And after 30 days, you'll have a lot of resources. And then you just try out being a leader. When I was a young bachelor, I heard that to make pasta, you take spaghetti pasta and you throw it on the wall, and when it sticks, the pasta's done. And I was so impatient, the pasta would always drop to the floor. And so that's my metaphor for leadership. At some point, you just, if you really take the time to get to know yourself, there's a good chance you're going to be humane towards others. And now when you try out leadership on your followers, you're gonna do a pretty good job. People will go the extra. Jim, you know this from being a basketball coach. People will go the extra mile for you if you say, I don't know, but you try damn hard for them. Excuse the language. Yeah.
That's perfect. And yeah, and I agree. For me also, I had to explore to find what like rings the bell for me. Just after graduation, I was in a bank, an international bank, but I felt like it is not at all aligning with what my personality is all about. I was bored, like I'm not interested in all this money and all this kind of stuff. And that is when I decided to leave the job in 4 months. So sometime even you have to explore, I think, to find out what really rhymes with you and what doesn't, what aligns with you and what doesn't. But self-awareness in your humanistic model, you were talking about self-awareness. So that is such a core area where you sit down and try to find out who you are. And we are often, the younger generation often are missing that time because they're not bored. So do you see that? Like, do you need that boring time to find that self-awareness, and why self-awareness is so important to become the leader you're supposed to be for a better world?
First of all, the younger generation today, 4 years, maybe they're 22 today. 4 years ago, they were just graduating high school, and we hit the pandemic. And so this is a point of emergence into the world. So this was delayed. So just as a footnote, the younger generation today is a little timid. They'd much rather text and talk in person to someone. They're a little bit afraid of the world right now. And the last thing they've ever really been taught is how to be self-aware. Unless you've had an enlightened parent or enlightened teacher growing up, the chances are you're not going to know a lot about yourself. And plus, today, especially with AI, we're all influenced by external factors. And so all those things are trying to distract us from ourselves. So I think, during the pandemic, I've always wanted to meditate. So I took up the app Headspace and I started studying Buddhism and meditating and so on. And anything young people can do today to put their phones aside and take at least 15 minutes a day and just think. Just think. Am I happy? On a scale of 1 to 10, how do I feel about myself with, right now, with 10 being the highest and 1 being the lowest? And then ask yourself, not just why, but what can I do about this response to make myself feel better? And so just 15 minutes a day, which young people and most of us don't take. So I think This is scary territory for young people, and I spend, I would say, over half of my time teaching young people today in the different colleges I teach at, and it's very important because when they become leaders, in the next 4 or 5 years, they're gonna need to master this, but it's a challenging time for sure.
Right.
I don't know if that answered your question.
Yeah.
Yeah, definitely. Perfect.
Dr. Craig, you mentioned about, building a leadership, growing yourself, and you talked about books and podcasts. I'm just curious because, obviously you're very proud of your books and we're proud of our podcast, but besides your books and our podcast, if you were to advise a young leader, what would be one or two books you would recommend and one or two podcasts that you found that would be able to help a young leader?
Mhm. Well, I love John Wooden's work. Of course, Jim, you resonate to this. I think it's called his book Wooden on Leadership is probably the best leadership book I've ever read.
Wow.
A lot. I think not. I think. I mean, I know that Coach Wooden was a humanistic leader. A lot of my work seems to resonate and align with his work. And so, for young people, I would say, especially sports fans, go back and study John Wooden. I think that would be um, that would be number one. Um, there are there are podcasts today that follow up on his work. At the moment, I can't think of the couple of people that are doing that. So that comes to mind. Um, I get this question a lot, and it's not because I've written my own work, but because there I don't like to recommend any specific person because I believe the best humanistic leaders out there are people that we'll probably never hear about. It's the single parent who's working really, really hard to raise their kids in ways that they're doing the best they can. So on one hand, I usually don't recommend anybody, but on the other hand, if I have to recommend, I would say Wooden's work. Um, 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 I don't know. I'm hesitant to recommend again specific people.
Mhm.
And the reason is not because I don't know, but because I like people to do their own research.
Mhm.
Um, there are certain people that everybody listens to, and everybody says, "Have you listened to so and so?" And I think it's important to do your own research. So I usually don't recommend specific.
Mhm. And I think the one thing that you have mentioned, there are so many leaders that we don't even know about. And I know that I think Simon Sinek was also mentioning, and in my LinkedIn also, there were some leaders during COVID time, while many businesses were focusing on profit over people, and that is why they were firing a lot of their employees. There were small businesses who instead of firing people, the CEO was not taking his or her salary, sold their second home so that they can keep all the employees. And those were the leaders who I think everybody cheered on, even through thick and thin. The employees were stuck to them. So I was wondering, while you were doing your research on humanistic leadership, did you find any compelling data or some kind of stories that resonated this importance of humanistic approach of leadership instead of going for the KPI and performance index and all those kind of thing? It is those humanistic characteristics that can overall help your company to do better.
Well, first of all, the KPIs and objectives and goal setting and measurement and all that, that's critical. But that's just one third of humanistic leadership, as I like to teach. So that's the management piece, what you described. On the leadership piece, the question is, who have been some great, visionaries, in the world.
Mhm.
And so some of those people have been direct leaders, and some of those people have, been indirect leaders. So when I think about this, I have to step back and say, well, there's a lot of people that are doing great things in the world in terms of leading and managing and coaching, but you have to put all of those things together. So
Right.
yeah, when I did my research, I looked at the last 100 years of literature in the field of management and leadership. And after a while, a lot of the ideas were started to overlap, which is why
Hmm.
I stepped back and said, I think we need a simpler model.
Hmm.
Sure.
My last question, and then I am going to hand it over to John. Uh, did you see any leadership of today's world that is showing those humanistic characters which popped up into your screen?
Hmm.
Any modern leaders?
Yeah, I do, but you wouldn't hear of them.
Mm.
You wouldn't have heard of
Like,
them. It's the person at Safeway the other day when I was checking out and there was an older woman behind me and she didn't have enough change to pay for her groceries and there was a guy behind her who gave her $3 to pay for her groceries and said to her, "It's
mhm,
okay, have a great day." It's
right.
the person who lost $5 out of their pocket as they were sneezing, and the person behind them came up, picked up the $5, ran up to them, and gave them their money back. It's uh,
Hmm.
it's the parent who says to their child, "I love you unconditionally." So my point is, there's billions of people every day that I think are humanistic leaders, but we'll never hear about them. So this is
Hmm.
why I'm always hesitant to recommend specific people because I think there's humanistic leadership in all of us. So
Right.
that's probably not the answer you want, but that's how I think about this.
Oh, no, that's and I was reading through those stories of Zeppo's CEO, who bought like an empty lot and built like residential unit for those employees who cannot afford.
Yeah,
So from
Tony Hsieh was a great leader at Zappos. Um, he wrote a book called Happiness. He
Mhm,
he he did great things. Sadly, he wasn't self-aware, and after he
mhm,
left Zappos, he had a lot of personal tragedies that happened to him,
right.
which is why you have to again you have to be self-aware. You can't just be a leader, a person who does great things for other people, but doesn't take care of yourself first.
Oh yes.
You've heard this. You're on the airplane, and the stewardess says, if we lose oxygen in the cabin, put your
Mhm,
mask on before your child's. It's the same
mhm,
same idea there. Um,
right.
Steve
Right.
Jobs is an amazing visionary. He created Apple, but he got fired from Apple later because he was a poor manager. He yelled at
Mhm,
people. So
true.
yes, there are a lot of people in the world that have good leadership skills or good management skills or good coaching skills, but there's very few people that have really focused on how to combine all three, and that's what I teach, that it's important to combine all three.
Hey, Dr. Nathanson, this is kind of going off of the point that you just made. Um, Tell me a little bit about how we can, as a society, certainly we've changed the culture of leadership a little bit, but there's still a lot of work to be done because a lot of people think leaders, they think titles. Yet, what you're saying resonates with all of us that being a parent is a leader, being a friend can be a leadership role. How do we continue to change that narrative and culture and embrace the roles that we all have, whether they have titles or not, because we all are leaders?
Yeah, in some cultures this is easier done than others. In collective cultures, this comes naturally, that you're going to help out others before you selfishly think of yourself. In American culture, we're an individualist culture. We've grown up over 200 years to kind of survival of the fittest. So it's a little challenging in American culture, and so I think we need more people here in the U.S. that kind of embellish humanistic leadership, which is why I'm spending so much time teaching this, because so it's a little bit harder for us here in the U.S. But it doesn't make it impossible. But it's difficult. We're in a capitalistic society where the CEO could legally get fired if he or she doesn't show that their
Mhm,
focus isn't on profit. And I say that profit's important, but it's how we make profit. Working with people or running over people. And so again, that's why I teach the Joyful Work workshop. That's why I focus on self-awareness first in the humanistic leadership model. We have to go back to really taking care of ourselves. Look, I want to keep doing this until I'm 100, and I won't let you figure out the math. in terms of how many more years that is. But, for me to do that, I have to, every single day, I have to take care of myself. I have to exercise. I have to take my naps. I have to eat properly. I have to meditate. I have to make sure that my work in the world is making a difference. Every single day, we have to work on ourselves. It doesn't happen by magic. And so I think that's the message is we have to work on ourselves. If we can work on ourselves, we're going to be much more tolerant and able to lead other people.
Yeah, that's a great point because I know John and Renuma, I always kid them that the first person you got to lead is yourself, and if you don't work on yourself, it's hard to lead others. So I very much agree with you 100%. My final question for you, and I really appreciate your insights today, Dr. Craig, is how about in helping people, because you hear a lot about people that are move up the leadership chain per se, that they get mentors. What advice would you give someone in helping them get the right mentor for him or her?
So I think it's important first to identify, Jim, what it is that you're really passionate about. What's the content area? Let's say it's basketball. Then I think there's three tiers of mentorship. I think the first tier is make a list of all the people um, make a list of all the people that you know, and make sure when you're speaking to them, you start talking about the content, the things that you want to do. Because the more you talk about your passion, your interest, the more you will attract, like-minded people. Second, I think it's important to have maybe 6 people in your life who are doing what you want to do, right? And usually people that love their work are happy to share. And, living or dead, connect with those people. Well, dead, you can read about them, but, connect with them in whatever way you can. And then finally, I think it is important to find one mentor, one guru, again, living or dead, who you could connect with or research and follow their wisdom. So it's kind of like we all need our own personal board of directors, I think.
Right.
That's a great point because I'll tell you a quick funny story. So my second basketball head coaching position was at a small school, and when I joined as the head coach, the first league meeting, there was one guy that was dominating the league, and it was funny because all the coaches, and I didn't really know any of the coaches because I was outside the area where I grew up. They hated this guy. Because all he did was crush everybody. And the funny thing is, I started thinking, I'm like, well, this guy knows something's going on. I ended up befriending him, and he helped mentor me, and we became good friends. So I think sometimes we forget as leaders that, people that are maybe a little bit above you or you having more success, those are people you want to learn from, not be upset because they're successful. So.
Absolutely. Very, very good advice.
Well,
You know, I,
Doctor, no,
I'm
go
sorry,
ahead.
go ahead, John.
I was just going to thank you for your time, but if you have another comment, please go right ahead.
He's good.
A 30-second story to wrap up my ideas.
Sure.
Yes, please do.
When I was 19, I was one of the youngest coaches in the history of San Francisco at a private high school. And I had no idea what I was doing, but I knew I loved the kids and I loved coaching. And anyway, I had a kid come to me who wanted to be a sprinter, and he was a 300-pound kid. In fact, his parents came to me and said, "Be careful that you don't work him out so hard because he needs to eat his dinner at night." And so each kid, I took a little piece of paper. I wrote down their goals for the year. And, for one kid, I said, "I want you to run the 100 meters under 11 seconds, which is fast." And let's call him Anthony. I said, "Anthony, I want you to run under 1 minute." He was running about 3 minutes in the races for 100 meters. He would run, he would wave at his parents, he would look around. And so we made this a goal together, right? And we come to the championship race, and he ran in a heat by himself. He ran pretty hard. He didn't look at he didn't look at his parents. And by the way, during the season, I had him run a few blocks, come back, report to me. The other kids were running miles. By the end of the year, he ran his final race. He came across the finish line I kid you not, in 58 seconds. I get shivers as I tell the story. He finished the race. He ran straight toward me and jumped on top of me. And he said, "Coach, we did it."
Wow.
And I was very young then, but I tell the story because I'll never forget the lesson I learned from Anthony, that coaching and really ultimately leadership it's about the we.
Yeah, that's a great point.
A
Thank
great
you.
And I think
story.
it's about parenting. You seem to be the parent also. And when we forget that when we are leaders, so when I'm running my nonprofit, I see all the person who are working in my nonprofit as my children. So their welfare, what they're doing, and that is why they feel that it's not a working place, but it's a family. So that's how I love to create my culture. And I see them as my children. So their welfare is, I have to look after that. So, and that makes a difference. And I think those are the things that we need to rethink leadership again, leadership. And I think your humanistic leadership model can make such a big difference in the world.
Well, you sound like a humanistic leader to me, Renuma. And I think together we can make a
I'm
difference.
trying.
We should never underestimate the personal power and potential we have to make a positive difference on others. So I really appreciate the work that all of you are doing.
Thank you.
Dr. Craig Nathanson, any ways to get in touch with you or learn more about your work?
I would suggest you can go to my website, drcraignathanson.com, and learn about all my work. I have 20 years of work there. Also, you can learn about the workshops. I'm currently giving 2 workshops to organizations on joyful work and humanistic leadership. Companies can be certified, which means they take the workshop and they say, we believe in humanistic leadership. And then connect with me on LinkedIn. I try, LinkedIn has, over 1 billion people. So that's a good market for my work. So I try to post 4 or 5 times a week these ideas. So, feel free to connect with me on LinkedIn.
Great.
Will do. And we're all grateful for your time. You shared so many powerful insights about humanistic leadership and from the man who basically invented humanistic leadership, right? Or at least championed the cause. So thank you, Doctor, for your time today. We really appreciate it.
My pleasure. Have a great day, everyone. Thank you.